I'm Sheernard Chickering Esquire, and the date is May 23, 2023. I'm interviewing Ellen Shelton Weinman, one of the first women attorneys to practice in the Roanoke Valley of Virginia. This interview is part of the Oral History Project of the Roanoke chapter of the Virginia Women Attorneys Association, recording the oral histories of the first women attorneys to practice in the 23rd Judicial Circuit of the Commonwealth of Virginia. This interview is taking place at the law office of Woods, Rogers, Van Deventer, and Black. The videographer is Melissa Stevens, and the stenographer is Kelly Hopkins. Ellen, do I have your permission to record this interview?
Sure.
Can you tell us your full name, where and when you were born, and the names and your family members, and just a little bit about your childhood?
Okay, I'm Ellen Weinman, and I was born on September 24th, 1951 in New Orleans, Louisiana.
Wow.
And I am the second of 6 children.
Okay.
So I have 3 brothers, 2 sisters. And my dad went to work for IBM. He graduated from LSU and went to work for IBM when it was a brand new company.
Wow.
And in fact, he worked at IBM his whole working life. And we moved around quite a bit. He started out as a salesman and worked his way up to finally we lived in corporate headquarters. So when I was a kid, we moved a lot.
Okay.
I don't think I went to school in the same school twice, the same place, 3 years in a row.
So what different places did you live?
We lived in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and then we went back to New Orleans. And then my dad worked for the NASA project for part of the time.
Wow.
So doing what IBM was doing with them. And so we moved around a lot, traveled a lot. And then we moved to Birmingham, Alabama, and then to Connecticut when he worked at corporate headquarters. And then when the year I graduated from college, my parents moved to Bethesda, Maryland. And
did they stay?
that was the last place they lived. He retired from Bethesda.
Okay.
So.
What kind of childhood was it?
Well, when you grow in a big family, I mean, and we moved a lot, so my brothers and sisters were oftentimes the only people I knew. My parents had this idea that you should move at the very end of the school year so that you were settled by the time school started again. But that generally meant you didn't get to meet many kids until school started again. So my brothers and sisters were pretty much people we were fairly close.
Okay.
I have one brother who's just 18 months older than I am.
Wow.
And then the younger ones one's 5 years younger, and one's 5 more years younger, and then the 3 little ones are the 18 months apart.
Goodness.
So.
Busy family.
Yes.
So what is your educational background and college experience?
I went to undergraduate school at Hollins, and then I went to graduate law school at William & Mary.
So you graduated from Hollins?
In 1973.
And William & Mary?
77.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about Hollins College and what your experience was like there.
Well, we had been living in Wilton, Connecticut. So we'd lived in the South most of our life. And then we moved up to the North. And my mother was fairly anxious for us to go back to school in the South. And my older brother was at the University of Virginia. And so I looked at schools close to where he was.
Okay. And so Hollins is an all-female school?
Yes.
Okay.
It was then. It still is.
And what was your major?
Politics.
Politics? I didn't know there was such a major.
That's what they called it.
Okay.
So it's political science, but they called it politics.
So how was your experience in undergraduate school?
I enjoyed my time at Hollins.
So did you like the fact that it was all female?
Yeah.
Okay. And then what made you decide to go to law school? Did you always have an interest in the law?
I think it was just something to do in the beginning. I mean, it was better than working, going back to school.
So generally, how many women were in your law school class?
I think there were probably 10.
Okay. And were there restrictions to the admission of women at William & Mary prior to your application and admission?
I don't think so. I don't know. I mean, there weren't many women, it's true, but there were some.
So it must have been awfully odd going from an all-female environment to law school experience where you were one of 10 out of a large class.
Law school is a lot more work than undergraduate school.
That's true.
So, I mean, you don't have a lot of time to fret about stuff.
So describe your law school experience.
It was a good experience. I mean, I enjoyed law school. It was not, it was a lot of work, but it was a good place to be.
And did you feel that the male students treated you and the other female students any differently, or the faculty?
I don't recall that there was anything that was really different.
Okay, all right. So once you graduated from law school, how did you come back to the Roanoke Valley?
Well, I had worked as the last summer before when I was in law school. I did an internship in the Commonwealth Attorney's Office in Roanoke County.
Oh, okay.
And so they gave me a job.
Okay.
So
tell me a little bit about that. Who was the Commonwealth Attorney there?
John Lampros.
Okay. And what was your experience like when you were doing the internship? Obviously you liked it because you went back and...
They were very easy people to work with. And you know, we got to do third-year practice then and stuff. So, and that was really the only place. I mean, I talked to other people about jobs, but that was the only place that was going to let me do trial work.
And that's what you were interested in doing?
Yeah.
Okay. So were there any any female attorneys in the office at the time that you took the position? And tell me a little bit about third-year practice and how that was interesting to you.
Well, I mean, I got to actually be in a courtroom and do things, and I thought I would like to do trial work as opposed to, you know, doing deeds and stuff like that.
Did you like criminal law?
Yeah, it was interesting.
Okay, okay. So how long were you at the Commonwealth Attorney's Office?
A couple of years.
And then...
I'm trying to think if it was 3 or 4 years. It was a while. I left the Commonwealth Attorney's Office. My son was born in 1980.
Oh, okay.
And I went back to work not too long, you know, 2 months after he was born. And I really didn't like working at that point in time. And so it was sort of, and my husband was a professor at Hollins, and he had a sabbatical. And so we went to Kentucky for him to work. He worked at the University of Kentucky for a year. And so I just didn't work.
Okay. So how did you meet your husband?
At Trust.
And tell me about that.
Well, when I was at Hollins, we started Trust, which was the Roanoke Valley Trouble Center. And it was a place, they had a 24-hour hotline and a place for emergency housing and different things, you know, people could call in with problems and stuff like that. And he was part of the people that worked on the board and stuff, so.
Okay. And was he part of Hollins College?
Yeah.
Okay. And
he taught statistics at Hollins.
Statistics, okay. Okay. And so were you married during law school or after?
No, it was after I got out of
law
school.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Was he one of the reasons you wanted to come back to Roanoke as well?
Oh yeah, I mean that's
the primary reason, probably.
Sure.
Okay, okay. So when you had your son, were you still at the Commonwealth Attorney's Office?
Yes.
And how did they handle, you know, the fact that you, the first female attorney, is now coming in saying that?
I think everybody was toward the end of the pregnancy. People were on edge. You know, I think, you know, they just. I mean, Judge Hoback was the judge in Roanoke County at that particular point, and you know, he pretty much ran that courthouse.
Yes.
And when I would go in to try cases in the morning, he would say to me, "Are you going to have that baby today?" And I would say, "I don't think so." but people were very. When I was pregnant, I got treated really, really well. I mean, people were really good to me, and I mean, he would say, "Do we need to take a break?"
Wow.
You know, he would often ask me, do we need to have a break now? Do we need to do this? Do we need to do that? That kind of stuff. So people were really good to you.
So then, how long were you out after you had the child?
I think I was a couple months before I went back to work, because I had a lot of sick leave and stuff.
Okay, so you didn't have to talk to them about extended maternity leave or anything like that.
Yeah.
So that didn't really come up as
well,
an issue.
like I say, I didn't work that much. Chris was born in November, I think I went back to work in January, February, something like that. And then when Dave we went to Kentucky in the fall, so I didn't work that much after he was born.
So how long were you in Kentucky?
Just a year.
Okay. And then when you came back, what did you do?
I worked for Marshall Mundy for a while, part-time.
Okay. And tell me how you decided to apply there and what your experience was.
Well, part of it was just being able to work part-time, and I have to think about that for a minute. The working part-time is really what I wanted to do, but it kind of got to where it was hard to do just part-time because other people's schedule and my schedule didn't work that way. So that's when I decided I would go on my own just to, because then I could control things better.
Sure, sure.
And, you know, and it seemed like people always needed to meet when you needed to get to daycare, and, you know, there was that kind of stuff.
I was going to ask you how you balanced all of that.
I had a really hard time in the beginning. I mean, we went through 2 or 3 childcare options, and then we met a lady who lived around the corner from us. Her name is Betty Shoup, and she was like a second grandmother to Chris.
That's lovely.
And once we hooked up with Betty, it was great. I mean, she took care of everything.
That's wonderful. So you decided to open your own office, and where did you
Salem.
land? Okay, did you pick Salem on purpose?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that's where I had worked when I was in the Commonwealth Attorney's Office.
Okay, and tell me how you grew your practice and how you ended up practicing in the areas that you did.
I don't know that it was ever anything deliberate that that you sort of said. It just kind of happened.
Okay.
I don't think it was anything that I ever really did deliberately, but I never managed to make a real firm that was making tons of money and stuff like that.
But that's what you wasn't what you were looking for.
Right.
Okay. So tell me how you were, how the clientele responded to you as a woman attorney.
Well, I mean, people obviously you choose whether you come to a lawyer's office. So I don't ever recall any problems with clients. It was more other lawyers sometimes.
So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, I think when I first started to practice law, I think some lawyers thought they could take advantage of you. I mean, I had an experience with Harvey Lutyens, for example, where he was in the courtroom, and it was in General District Court, and he is spouting off about this case, this, that, and he had a book in his hand, and he's looking at it, and, like he's reading from it and stuff. And Charlie Phillips was sitting behind me, and he said, "Ask him to let you see it." I said, "What?" He said, "Ask him to let you see it. Because it's not what he's reading, what he's saying is not what he's reading, and he doesn't have a case. It was pretty much,
yes.
And that's true. He's just making it up."
Oh my goodness.
And but once you said, "Well, let me look at that. I'd like to read that," and then it was kind of, he backed off.
And did you find that there were some attorneys that were less open to working with women attorneys, and
Yes.
some like Charlie Phillips who were more supportive of it?
Right.
Okay.
And I mean, I went one place when I was working for Marshall. I went to take a deposition, and when the senior lawyer at this firm, Woods Rogers, realized that it was going to be me instead of Marshall, he sent somebody else in.
Oh goodness.
To do the deposition. It was like we were not equals.
So how many women attorneys were in the bar initially, from your recall?
Well, there were Ann Edenfield, and Angelica, Diane Strickland, and Linda Steele, and Melba Perkey.
So tell me a little bit about how y'all worked together or didn't. Did you support each other? Did y'all socialize?
We would have lunch together, once a month maybe.
Okay.
And I think people thought we were having powwows to, make plans to how we were going to take them over, but it really wasn't that.
Did you find that it was nice to have a group that you could actually socialize and identify with? Yeah. So were there Were there times that you felt that the judges were or weren't supportive of you?
I never felt that the judges weren't supportive.
Okay. So, have you seen progress in the way that legal employers and the courts have handled and supported women during their pregnancy, nursing, and care of their children since you were a new mother?
I think so. I think people are getting, I mean, there are a lot more women lawyers now.
Right.
Than there were then. So I think they're, I mean, I imagine childcare is still hard for people. I mean, I know my daughter-in-law is a nurse, and she has, in Nashville, and she has, daycare is a difficult thing to keep. And once you find it, you have to put up with a lot of stuff because there aren't that many, there's no other place for you to go. So if they say we're closing today because the weather's bad, then you got to figure out what to do, because you can't just say, I'll take my kid out and we'll go over here. It just doesn't work that way.
Sure, sure. So you decided fairly early on, or at least as you noted, that your practice tended towards more domestic work. Tell me about that.
Well, I did a lot of family law. I did a lot of work with battered women. Darlene Young at the Turning Point called me one day and asked me if I could help her out with something, and I ended up doing a lot of work with them. I also did a lot of work with adoption.
Okay.
My sister was having trouble getting pregnant, and so I started looking into adoption to try to help her out, and I got involved, and that helped me work out finding a baby for her. And once you do that and it's fun, I mean, that's kind of a fun thing to do.
So tell us a little bit about what the Turning Point actually was.
The Turning Point was a battered women's shelter.
Okay.
That the Salvation Army ran down and they still do, on Salem Avenue. And so the women could come, people could come there, and they would often need legal help. And
you actually kind of made a lifelong practice of actually being very supportive of disenfranchised type of women in those types of situations.
Yes.
Was that important to you, and was that a focus of your practice once you got involved in that?
I was raised, I mean, I was really lucky. I lived a very charmed life, and I always had everything. But one of the things my mom and dad always talked a lot about was that those too much is given, much is expected. Sure. And that it's, because you've been so lucky, you need to make sure you take care of other people who aren't so lucky.
Sure, sure. So you also did domestic work in terms of custody, visitation, and divorces. I remember one time that you used to say that if you felt the litigants hated each other more than they loved their children, that you wouldn't represent them.
I would tell people that when they came in for the first interview. I would say, if I ever get to the point where that's obvious to me, that's the end. I'm not going to do it anymore.
And how often did you run into that?
Every now and then you did, but most of the time people would, people do love their children more than they hate their spouses. Most people do.
So you also served as a guardian ad litem.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, when representing children is always more, the kids are the victims, and they're not, they don't cause the trouble. They don't do things on purpose to make things, to cause trouble. So it's easier to represent kids than it is parents, I think.
So what was your experience of doing that?
The divorce is really hard on children. Mm-hmm. That you ought to figure out a way to stay together as much as you can, because it's not good what happens to kids and that kind of thing.
And certainly that's an area of the law where your remuneration is determined by the court and certainly isn't considered financially lucrative. But what prompted your decision to become deeply involved with that?
Because I like kids, and children are just more fun to be around.
How much of your practice was devoted to pro bono work?
I don't know how much, too much probably.
Well, that was your choice, right?
Right.
Absolutely.
I mean, I had to make enough money to pay my secretary's salary and expenses and stuff, but I didn't have to make any more money after that.
Right, right. So, in addition to focusing your practice on areas affecting women and children, you also became actively involved with other organizations that sought to protect those women and children. And you mentioned the Turning Point, and you also mentioned, I believe, what was the trust?
Yeah, now, I worked at Trust when I was in college.
Okay.
And I continued to volunteer for a while afterwards.
Okay.
But then Trust kind of closed up after a while.
Okay.
I mean,
So tell me, what other organizations did you get involved with?
I was trying to think. Well, had a stint on the board at Children's Trust, CASA. Where else of it was I? I did.
Mental Health Association
Yeah,
of the Roanoke Valley?
mental health. I did several times on the board there.
And then for a while you were kind of in charge of National Adoption Day in the Roanoke Valley,
Right.
correct? Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, we did Adoption Day. When did we start that? I did it for about 10 years. It was part of the best practices thing when they started doing best practices in the juvenile court. And then we did the Adoption Day where we had a celebration in November. And actually, you know, the judges came in on a Saturday. Actually, Judge Swanson came in on a Saturday because he pretty much did it. I think Judge Weckstein did it once, but he was late getting there, and so we kind of counted on Judge Swanson to be the one to do it.
Sure.
And then they would have a public display at the thing, and then we would do a celebration at Andrew Lewis Middle School afterwards.
Okay. So there came a time when you decided to actively pursue an appointment to the Juvenile and Domestic Relations Court. Is that right?
Well, I did talk about being a judge a couple of times. I was a substitute judge for a long time, but that never worked out.
Okay, well, tell me a little bit about the subjudging. Did you enjoy that?
It's a different perspective. It's a very different place to be. Some parts of it I thought were yes. I mean, I did it. I enjoyed doing it. Yeah. And you'd get to go. I would get to go to different courts, so it wasn't just around. In fact, it was more outside of Roanoke than, you know, because I guess they like for you not to have. They don't want you to be the judge for people that you practice law with. But,
Sure.
I would say the thing that I didn't like about it is that you didn't get any feedback, and pretty much, you know, there was nobody that did that job that watched you do the job.
Right.
So there was no real feedback about what you were doing.
Did you get feedback from the attorneys that appeared in front of you, or?
Not much.
Okay. Okay. So tell me why about your experience with the process of putting yourself out there for the juvenile.
It was a very unpleasant experience.
In what way?
You never knew whether people were telling you the truth or not.
Right.
I mean, people would tell you that they were, you know, and then, you know, you just never knew what they were going to do. And I think there was probably a lot of it had to do with being a woman, that was not something that was, that we were doing well in Roanoke.
Yep, I would agree with that. Did anybody directly ever say, my problem is that you're a woman, or was it just more implied?
I don't think anybody ever, I can't remember that anybody ever said that to me, but it was clear to me that was true.
Okay.
But I mean, people told you that they were going to support you, and when they really had no intention of doing it. I mean, they were telling everybody that.
Sure, sure. There's really, at this point, one circuit court judge that we've ever had in the Roanoke Valley, and that was Judge Diane Strickland,
right,
who, as you indicated, was one of the first female attorneys also practicing in this judicial district. And she retired in 2002. And then she was on the General District Court bench, and then Jacqueline Levy was, and we've had 4 that have been appointed to the Juvenile Court bench. What are your observations of all of that, and your thoughts about the fact that it's been 20 years since we've had a circuit court judge who's a female, and there's only been one, and there's such sparse appointments that we've had?
Well, I think it's just, it takes time. In the beginning, there weren't that many women. When I first started practicing law, there weren't that many women in Roanoke. When Judge Strickland became a judge, there still weren't all that many women practicing law. Now there's a ton of women practicing law. But they're also, the more women there are, what's the right way to, they're mediocre women lawyers now.
Sure.
And when I first started practicing law, there were no mediocre women lawyers.
Right.
I mean, that was all there was to it. There just weren't. And now there are. In fact, there are probably even some not good lawyers that are women. Whereas I don't think that was true in the beginning. So the more you have, obviously the quality
right
dissipates some.
Right. Well, you'd mentioned that the earlier women attorneys, that y'all would get together and kind of socialize and support each other. There also came a time when you became involved in the formation of the Roanoke chapter of the Virginia Women Attorneys Association. Tell me about that and what prompted you and
Well, there was a statewide organization, and they were having some women, and I think that was a good thing, though, that women got more organized so that they're we're making more strides across the board.
So what do you feel your accomplishments were as part of the Virginia Women Attorneys Association, forming the chapter here?
Well, I think it gave it kind of ebbed and flowed some. I mean, there were times when people were more involved and times when they weren't. But I think it gave people an opportunity to meet. I certainly met a lot of women that I would not have met, that were practicing other places, like the larger firms and things like that. Because the kind of work I was doing, you didn't meet those people.
Right.
So you got to meet a lot of people that were probably doing different things than you were.
And do you feel like some of the programs instituted, like You Be the Judge and some other things, were supportive of trying to actually help women make inroads into?
I think they helped. I'm not sure they helped people in the Roanoke Valley, but,
right.
But I think they helped statewide. I mean, there are a lot more women judges in Virginia now than there were 20 years ago.
And you were never part of officially part of the Roanoke Bar Association, because your practice was
right.
always in Salem.
Right, the county.
But what do you think? What are your thoughts about the fact that for the first time since they incorporated in 1925, it's an all-female board and an all-female set of officers? Does that surprise you?
No, like I said, it doesn't really surprise me. It took a long time for it to happen.
Sure.
Much more.
So tell me, were there some people, judges or attorneys, that you particularly admired?
Judge Trumpeter, I have a lot of admiration for him. I mean,
now, say who Judge Trumpeter was.
He was a juvenile court judge, and he mostly in the county. I guess he did some in the city, but mostly in the county. But I mean, he was very much child-oriented, and it mattered to him what happened in his courtroom. Sometimes you get the feeling that judges do it so much that it stops being personal and important to them. Mm-hmm. That people stop being individuals, and I don't think that ever happened with Judge Trumpeter. I think he always, probably too much, became too much of that it probably took too much of a toll on his heart.
And you mentioned Judge Hoback.
Judge Hoback, he ran the courthouse. I mean. At that particular time, I think he was the oldest sitting judge in the Commonwealth.
Wow.
At that time, that he'd been on the bench longer than anybody else, and he'd been on the bench a very long time. And he had rules, but there's having a boss is a good thing sometimes.
Sure.
Because in other places there are different rules in different courtrooms, but he was the boss in Roanoke County, and everybody did what the boss said. I mean, he wasn't ugly about it, but he was clear that his rules were there and you were to follow them.
And you mentioned Charlie Phillips.
Yes.
Did you feel he was supportive of you?
Charlie, want to be diplomatic about how I
Sure.
say this. I mean, Charlie, I think was supportive, but he could hurt your feelings.
That's true.
Huh?
That's
I mean, I mean, one time I even said to him, because he wrote me this letter, and I called him and I said, that really hurt my feelings. He said, well, I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. And I said, but it did. Well, I didn't mean it, so it doesn't count. I mean, it was that kind of stuff. I wasn't trying to hurt your feelings, so, if you got hurt, that was your problem. That's not my problem.
So, what other accomplishments do you feel are important to you, both legal and non-legal, throughout your career?
Well, like I say, I got involved in adoption because my younger sister, was in a situation where she was not able to have children, and she really wanted to have children. So we worked really. I mean, that's my reason for getting involved in adoption, was to help her out with that, and it just turned into something that I did a lot of. Because once you get involved, I guess you make contacts and stuff like that. So that's something I really think. I think we did a good job helping the ladies at the Turning Point. There were a lot of people who needed help and wouldn't get it if we weren't there to help them. And we got other people there. We did some training, so other people got involved too, so to help to do some of that work. And like I say, I tried to help people that needed to be helped. And that's all you can do.
That's true. Do you, at this stage, you've truly been a trailblazer for not only for women in the law in Virginia, but in particular in the Roanoke Valley, but also for mental health reform, protection of children, and protection of abused women. What are your observations of the progress or lack thereof of equality of women attorneys in Virginia and elsewhere, and women on the bench?
Well, I think that we're making progress. I mean, I think obviously we still there's a lot more we need to do. I mean, the unfortunate part in this country is that, you have to have financial resources to get legal help. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of people that need legal help that don't have financial resources to do it. And, we need to do a better job of that. Legal aid doesn't have enough people to do what they need to be able to do, that kind of thing.
And in the domestic arena, they're sort of constrained from helping people by their own rules, unless
right.
It's a no-fault divorce.
Right. And divorces are very difficult, and there are a lot of people that end up staying in a situation that is very uncomfortable and even dangerous for them because they're financially dependent, and they have no way to support themselves outside of that. So there needs to be more help for people like that.
Is there any particular case that's memorable to you or important from your recall?
No, not any one.
Okay.
There are a lot of people that I think it made a difference to be able to help them. To be able to help do, and a lot of kids that it makes a difference to help. There needs to be more guardian. Right now I volunteer at CASA. I've done that ever since I retired.
And you want to talk about what CASA is first?
Court-appointed special advocates.
Okay.
So they're people who are appointed by the court to help to advocate for the child. Mm-hmm. And I see, as a CASA volunteer, I see a lot of crummy guardian ad litems.
I'm sure you do.
and that's disturbing to me, mm-hmm. that people aren't advocating the way they should for a kid. Mm-hmm. And you see a lot of people who never even see, they never go to visit the kid. And somehow they've told the court they did, because they're supposed to have at least had one face-to-face meeting with the child. And I mean, they didn't, but they do.
Right.
And that disturbs me, that the court doesn't do anything about it. that the judges don't insist that people do a better job.
Right, right. So Ellen, do you have any message you want to give women that are just coming into the practice of law today?
Well, I do think that you ought to try to give back some. I mean, you probably don't need to give back as much as I did, because people need to take care of themselves. But people ought to, you're privileged when you're a lawyer, and you ought to give back to help out. I think that's one thing, and I don't think women have to put up with as much anymore in that sense. But maybe they do, and I just don't know it.
Sure.
I wish people would be a little less. I remember that I got called that I was mean. Men are aggressive. I was mean and pushy. It was a whole different way of looking at things. I think that's changed some. I hope it has. I wish people, like I say, I wish they'd do a better job as guardian ad litem. That's the part. I watch that at CASA all the time. And even people who I thought were good guardians ad litem do not do what they should be doing, which is a surprise to me.
Yes.
As a CASA volunteer, they don't return my phone calls.
Wow.
You call up somebody who's the child's guardian ad litem, and they don't call you back.
Wow. Yeah.
And you just say, what?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I make an appointment. And then you have to talk to me.
That's a good way to do it without being mean, right?
Right. Yeah.
What would you most like your legacy to be?
Well, I have 2 grandchildren. And I think the most thing that I'm the proudest of is that my son is such a good dad.
That's lovely.
I think that's probably the thing that makes me the happiest, is to watch what a great dad he is.
That's lovely. Well, Ellen, I really enjoyed the interview, and thank you for doing it. This was just lovely.
Good. I enjoyed it too.
Thank you.
Sure.